Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be diving deep into the three powerful tools for building back ends of modern apps: REST API, GraphQL, and WebSockets. Ever wondered which one is the best for you? By the end of this video, you have a clear understanding of how they work, their pros and cons, and when to use them. Let's get started. First up, we have REST APIs. REST stands for Representational State Transfer, and it's been a foundational model for building web services for years. REST is based on a stateless client-server communication, usually over HTTP. REST uses endpoint to access resources, and each resource is identified by a URL. For example, to get a list of users, you need to use GET request to user. Want to create a new user? Use a post request to user. Now, let's talk about the advantages of REST API. The first advantage we're going to go over is simplicity. REST is relatively simple and easy to implement. This makes it ideal for developers who just want to quickly set up a backend without complex configurations. Another advantage is scalability. Since REST relies on HTTP protocols, it's inherently scalable across various environments, from local servers to large cloud infrastructures. And lastly, we have wide adoption. REST is widely supported by almost all modern platforms and languages, which means it integrates easily with existing systems. Now let's touch on some of the disadvantages of REST API. The first one I want to touch on, which is also one of the more common issues people face when using REST API, is overfetching data. REST can lead to overfetching data where clients receive more data than they need, since each endpoint is tied to specific resource representations. Another disadvantage of using REST API is no real time. REST is not designed for real-time communication. If your app requires frequent updates like live notifications or chats, REST might not be the best choice for you. And lastly, I would say another disadvantage is multiple requests. REST often requires multiple requests to fetch related data. For instance, if you need users and their associated posts, you may need to call two separate endpoints. Next, we have GraphQL. GraphQL was actually created by Facebook to solve some of the problems with REST API. With GraphQL, you can query exactly the data you need. Instead of multiple endpoints, there's typically just one endpoint, and you specify the shape of the data you want. In a GraphQL query, you request only the fields you need, nothing more, nothing less. For example, if you want to get a list of users on only their names and email addresses, you can do that with a single query. Let's go over some of the advantages of GraphQL. The first advantage, and the most important advantage, is actually kind of like an antithesis to the first disadvantage we discussed under REST API. And this advantage is optimized data fetching. GraphQL prevents overfetching and underfetching of data. It allows clients to request only the exact data they need, reducing bandwidth and improving performance. The next advantage I'd like to go into is strongly typed schema. GraphQL has strongly typed schema that defines the structure of the API, making it easier to manage, validate, and document the API as it evolves. Another advantage of GraphQL is efficient queries. Unlike REST, GraphQL enables you to fetch related data in single request, even if the data comes from a different source. This makes it incredibly efficient, especially for complex data relationships. Now let's talk about the disadvantages of GraphQL. The first disadvantage we're going to talk about is the complex setup. GraphQL's flexibility does come at a cost. It is more complex to set up than REST, especially for developers who are new to it or working with simple use cases. Another disadvantage is real-time challenges. GraphQL does not natively support real-time communication like WebSockets. While it offers subscriptions to emulate real-time features, this can add more complexity. And lastly, it is overkill for simple use cases. For smaller applications with straightforward data needs, GraphQL's complexity can be unnecessary and might introduce overhead that REST could handle more easily. Let's talk about WebSockets. These are a bit different from REST and GraphQL because they are built for real-time, two-way communication. Basically, once a connection is set up between the client and the server, it stays open. This means data can move back and forth freely without constantly making new requests. This is huge for apps that need real-time updates. Think messaging apps and livestock trading platforms. It keeps everything running smoothly and in sync. Now let's talk about the advantages of WebSockets. First up, we have real-time communication. WebSockets are perfect for real-time apps because they let data flow instantly between clients and servers. That's why they're great for things like live chats, gaming, and even stock market updates. Secondly, low latency. Since the connection stays open, you don't have to keep reconnecting for every bit of data exchange like you would for REST API. This means way less lag. Thirdly, efficiency. WebSockets make good use of network resources since everything happens on a single continuous connection. This is awesome when you need to push a lot of updates quickly. Now let's talk about some of the disadvantages of WebSockets. The first disadvantage is complex implementation. Getting WebSockets up and running can be quite a headache. It is more involved than setting up REST or GraphQL, especially when you have to manage those open connections and deal with network issues. Secondly, not always necessary. Honestly, if your app doesn't need real-time updates, WebSockets might be overkill. Sometimes just a simple polling setup with REST is enough. Thirdly, scaling challenges. Since WebSockets keep a connection open for each client, scaling up to handle lots of users can get tricky and resource intensive. Now that you have an overview of these technologies, let's discuss the applications and when to use them. We're going to start with REST API. REST API is best for crude operations, simple apps, and when you're dealing with third-party APIs that don't need real-time communication. An example can be a simple blogging site where people post and read blogs. For GraphQL, it's best for apps with complex data relationships or when you want to reduce the number of API calls and avoid fetching too much unnecessary data. It's best for online stores where you grab products, categorize, and review at once. For WebSockets, it's best for real-time apps like chat apps, live feeds, or anything that has to do with notification. It's important to note that you don't have to use just one, and that's the cool part. A hybrid approach is often the best move. For instance, you could use REST for basic data fetching, GraphQL for more complex stuff, and WebSockets for any real-time features. By mixing and matching, you can create a super efficient and scalable app that best fits what you're going for. Okay, that's a wrap. Hopefully, this has helped clear up the differences between REST, GraphQL, and WebSockets, and has given you a better idea of when to use each one. If you found this video helpful, make sure you give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more developer content. I'd love to hear from you, so make sure you drop a comment and let me know which one you're excited to try in your next project. Also, feel free to check out my other videos for more tips on how to build modern apps. Catch you in the next one.